Losing your 50-50 to Hush has become something of a meme at this point. It's common for veterans to rush to tell new players about how bad she is and how they should avoid investing anything into her. Somehow, at the same time, a handful of players are breaking neural simulation time records using her. Let's talk about how Hush can be the worst and nearly best character at the same time. When we talk about Hush, we're really just talking about her ultimate, Lasting Flame. It's the only thing she does, really. If her other abilities didn't exist, it actually would not affect anything I'm about to say in this video. Lasting Flame starts off doing basically no damage for exactly 4 seconds. It deals a tick of damage every 10th of a second and gains a stacking 2% final damage bonus with each tick. If we assume a baby Frito has 500 attack, that means she'll do 106 damage before defense with the first tick of her ult, and 188 with the last. Over the whole 4 seconds, she'll deal just under 6,000 damage. If we compare this to a character that actually does things with the rest of their kit and their gun, Ethereal Cloud, we can immediately see the problem. A baby Ethereal Cloud with the same 500 attack will deal 7,150 damage in a large area while also knocking down all enemies and buffing her own gun damage when she uses her ult. Kind of embarrassing for Hush. Worse, if Baby Cloud were to simply shoot an enemy with those stats, she would deal about 4,800 damage in one clip if hitting a weak point. If she used her standard skill on a single target, this would jump to 5,952 damage. Finally, if she was hitting a shielded enemy, this would double to about 12,000 damage. This would take her about 3 seconds to do. So if we compare Hush's damage after gathering U energy to what other characters can do by left-clicking at any time, it's clear that Hush is complete garbage. But what if we look a little further down the line? In our current DPS charts, operatives are measured at Manifestation 2 with full neuronics and logistics. Let's look at how Hush's damage compares first with a 4-star weapon and then a 5-star. Lasting Flame will now do a bit of damage and gain a 3% final damage bonus per tick. It is now able to fire until you run out of U energy. We'll assume it lasts 9 seconds, since that's about what you can do with Hush in a solo party. Let's use Strawberry Shortcake as the 4-star weapon and Finia as a logistics set. Hush will have 4,032 attack here and will deal, before defense, 2,915 damage with the first tick of her ult and 9,242 with the last. Over the entire 9 seconds, she will deal 547,039 damage, or 60,782 DPS. Let's break that up into 4.5 second chunks to compare to an Ethereal Cloud emptying her clip and reloading. For the first 4.5 seconds, Hush deals 210,541 damage, or about 44,787 DPS. For the second 5 seconds, Hush deals 345,498 damage, or 76,777 DPS. Ethereal Cloud will only deal 50,480 DPS before defense for each 4.5 second chunk. So is that it? Is Hush good now? Well, as long as you're getting free U energy and your enemies have 550,000 HP or less, sure. Incidentally, difficulty 5 neural sim bosses tend to have about 2 million HP. Even if Hush could be considered good during her ult, she still has the issue of needing tons of time to actually be able to use it. She will need about 60 seconds to reach 120 U energy with Strawberry Shortcake. If we include this charging time in our DPS calcs, during which Hush deals 844,300 ballistic damage, her sustained damage drops to 20,164 DPS. Again, hot garbage. Well, let's try with a T1 5-star weapon and see if that's any better. With Lava Bones, Hush will have 4,525 attack and will deal, before defense, 4,136 damage with the first tick of her ult, and 13,115 with the last. Over the entire 9 seconds, she will deal 776,323 damage, or 86,258 DPS. She still needs about 55.3 seconds to build U energy, during which she will deal 834,992 ballistic damage. So her sustained DPS is only 25,059, compared to Ethereal Cloud's 60,018 DPS when she has her 5-star weapon. It hardly needs to be said, but this is complete trash. So what would it take to make this train wreck of a character good? Naturally, if the U-Energy charging time shrinks, her numbers improve. In order to reach the sustained DPS numbers of Ethereal Cloud, Hush needs to farm up 120 U-Energy in about 30 seconds. Since the maximum U-Energy bonus a single character can get from logistics substats is 42.3%, and she'd need almost 100% to pull that off, there's simply no way for her to ever be good by herself. She is mathematically a failure. Now that we've established how truly terrible she is, let's talk about how she is simultaneously a top-tier DPS character. Hush's problems were never in the damage part of her kit. The damage she puts out at her peak is unironically good. Her issue was always that reaching that peak took too much time. If something were to happen that let her operate at peak DPS for the entire fight, she would very quickly become an amazing operative. Tess is a character that allows Hush to operate at peak DPS for the entire fight. She also drastically improves what that peak looks like. Let's take a look. We'll use the 5-star weapon loadout from the DPS ranking sheet that we used earlier, but now assume that we also have a support with the same quality of gear. We'll assume our support to be Manifestation 3, since that allows Tess to operate at full effectiveness with skill damage based operatives. Tess will buff the team's damage by 24% with her T1 weapon, 45% with her logistics, and 30% with her support skill, for a total buff of 99% to all types of damage. She will also generate about 60 U energy instantly and additional U energy every 2 seconds if her allies are hitting the enemies. This allows for extended Hush ultimates. We'll assume a conservative 15-second ult for this example. If Tess and Hush fight together, the burst DPS from Hush's ultimate can be used at the start of the fight instead of after gathering U energy. If this burst is sufficient to kill the target, then the DPS during her ult will be her sustained DPS for the fight. So what kind of damage does Hush do with this kind of support? With Tess, Hush benefits from switching to Thieves logistics, so we'll use those here instead of Finia. Hush will deal, before defense, 5,925 damage with the first tick of her ult, and 27,456 damage with the last. Over the entire 15 seconds, she will deal, before defense, 2,503,552 damage, or 166,903 DPS. All non-labyrinth enemies in Snowbreak have exactly enough defense to reduce damage by 50%. We can expect to deal about 1,250,000 damage to bosses in Neural Simulation. This is enough to kill the squishier bosses, namely Will Anderson, Katya, Esther, and Hardened Joseph. For comparison, Ethereal Cloud will see a damage boost to 102,362 DPS if she is accompanied by Tess. But perhaps we should use a different comparison now. After all, Ethereal Cloud's strength is against multi-part bosses. Let's take a look, instead, at the Queen of Single Target DPS, Yao Winter Solstice.
You're kidding.
Like Hush, Yao relies on her ultimate to deal damage and benefits not only from Tess's direct damage buffs, but also from the bounty of U energy she supplies. Also like Hush, she's at her best when dealing with a single target. The primary reason Yao performed better than Hush at launch is because sniper rifles build U energy much more quickly than assault rifles, and Yao's attack reset reload mechanic lets her build U energy even faster than usual. Yao was able to reach her peak damage form quickly enough that her DPS wasn't terribly diluted. These two make for a fairly even comparison in terms of ultimate focus DPS units, especially since they use the same supports. Yao Winter Solstice deals 114,590 DPS before defense by herself, when in ult form and making use of her reload mechanic. With Tess, this will grow to 155,102 DPS. So if Hush is doing more DPS, why is Yao at the top of the rankings? For one, ballistic damage is doubled against shields. That means that for any boss with a shield, Yao gets a free 100% damage boost for part of the fight. But there's still another, critically important piece of the puzzle. After all, we still have one more support slot open.
It's completely different from the scenery on the other side. Yeah.
Location reached. Target acquired. Mauxir.
Mauxir Shadow Ka is a ballistic focus support. Specifically, she works best when supporting sniper rifles. While her support skill will give an effective 10% damage boost to anything, her Davos passive is a massive, single-shot crit damage boost. It is best used with massive, single-shot ballistic damage, and no one does that like Yao Winter Solstice. Furthermore, Mauxir's logistics set gives a 30% damage buff only for ballistics. While Hush and Winter Solstice both use Mauxir in their ideal team, Winter Solstice gets much more benefit from the pairing. Currently, there is no similarly effective support for Hush. With Tess and Shadow, Winter Solstice sees her DPS jump to 419,658, or a 271% increase over Tess alone. Meanwhile, Hush, with the same supports, sees her DPS grow to 329,065, or a 197% increase over Tess alone. At high investment levels, Yao's version of this team can clear B13 in 9.7 seconds. B13 has 1.8 million total health, of which 600,000 is shield. That puts Yao's full team DPS at 371,134 pre-defense DPS for the fight. Against the same boss, Hush's version of the team clears in 12.8 seconds. This puts Hush's full team DPS at 281,250 pre-defense DPS for the fight. Comparing this to our medium investment numbers, we see some number degradation in a practical scenario. Yao doesn't get to ult until 4 seconds in, so she loses out on some DPS, but partially makes up for it due to the shield. Hush comes closer to her calculated numbers and ults only 2 seconds in, but the boss dies before her ult finishes, and thus the higher damage back end doesn't come into play. Currently, there is only one boss where Hush beats Yao, Hardened Joseph. As we might expect, it is a boss where a shotgun unit is mandated, and thus only one of the two key supports gets to come along. This boss has no shield, and his weak point is not readily available, so there isn't much ballistic damage advantage. Based on this, we can make the following predictions about what might push Hush to the top of the rankings. If a skill damage support on the level of Mauxir Shadow Ka is released. If bosses with higher HP are released. If bosses with no shield or weak point are released. The first two predictions seem like safe bets. The third also seems likely, since we've just received a boss with no weak point for most of the fight. To recap, Hush's solo damage output is too low to be viable. With a support that solves her primary issue, she instantly becomes the best raw DPS in the game. However, Yao Winter Solstice similarly benefits from Tess, but also has a second perfect support pairing in Mauxir Shadow Ka. Not surprisingly, We tend to see Yao at the top of the rankings for single target bosses, with Hush coming in second. When people say that Hush is a bad unit, they're technically right. When people say she's an amazing unit, they're right as well. But as the game grows older, the things holding Hush back seem to be falling away. That's why, with an eye to the future, I think it's safe to say she's a good long-term investment, even if you probably shouldn't build her immediately after making your account.